Hello and welcome to the Photographic Connections podcast, the podcast where we create connection to self, nature and others through the art of photography. My name is Kim Grant, the founder of Photographic Connections and your host for this podcast. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome the acclaimed seascape photographer Rachael Talibart onto the podcast. We speak about where her connection to the coast first stemmed from, the importance of being truly authentic in your photography work, and why the experience of being in nature is so much more important to her than the final images. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rachael Talibart. Hi Rachael, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast this week. I am super excited to speak with you because I've followed your work now for a few years now, and I first discovered you through a video that Sean Tucker created on his YouTube channel, which must be a good 2 or 3 years ago now. And ever since then, I've had this really deep, following with your work, because I've always had a very deep connection to the coast, like yourself, and a lot of what your kind of philosophy around photography has always really resonated with me. So before we delve deeper into that, I'd love you to go back to the beginning of your journey and explain kind of what got you into photography in the first place.
Oh, well, thank you, Kim. Thanks very much for inviting me on your podcast. That's very, very nice, and it's lovely to meet you. Yes, so I've been into photography since my late teens, but very much as a sort of happy snapper, went on holiday, did some snaps kind of thing. And then when I qualified in my first career, I was allowed to take some unpaid leave and took my backpack round the world very fast for 9 weeks on my own, and took my first, it was a little 35mm compact camera. Obviously this is a long time ago because I'm not as young as you, so it was film, and just went off around the world photographing what I saw, and I saw a lot of really beautiful things. And because I was travelling alone, didn't have a companion to say, oh, look at that, that's amazing. But as I do like to share, it was almost as if photographing the thing, making that snap, was a way of expressing that I had seen it, and knowing that I would eventually share that photograph to my long-suffering family and friends who eventually learned to run if I showed up with a big bag because it was full of film. And so when I came back, and I was completely hooked and upgraded to an SLR, and it became a passion for me. But it didn't become a career until many decades later.
Brilliant, because I believe you started your professional life as a solicitor, so it must have been quite not a difficult transition maybe, but a big leap, I guess, to take to kind of train in that, and then to convert that into a world of photography. And this is, I think, a dilemma that a lot of people have. They get into certain careers and they want to pursue something more artistic and things like photography, and they find that very difficult. So how was it for you kind of moving from being a solicitor into having your own self-employed photography business?
Well, it was fine because I didn't do it in one big go. I had a big gap in between of about 15 years where I was raising a family and I was at university again doing more degrees. And so it was something that happened for me very, very slowly, in that I started to, as the children got older, needed me less, I started to do more and more photography again, and then occasionally picked up a little bit of money here or there with it. And so it was very gradual, and it wasn't until 2016 that I sort of decided to go full time.
Brilliant. I think it's quite interesting because we both began our photography journeys when we were teenagers, and while our journeys have been very unique in their own way, I started my professional life as a nurse, and photography kind of ran throughout that, and then from there I just kind of fell into it, almost a bit like yourself. I didn't ever intend to do this professionally. It just kind of happened. So I always love to hear everybody's different journeys into photography and how they became to do it in more a professional way. And your deepest connection with your work is the coastline. So where did your connection to the coast first begin?
Well, it's all my dad's fault. I grew up in West Sussex. In fact, we could see the sea from the spare bedroom if we sort of stood on a chair and craned our necks. And Dad was a really keen yachtsman. So for the first, I think, maybe 12 years of my life, every weekend and all of the school holidays were spent at sea, which sounds quite idyllic, doesn't it? And it was certainly a very different childhood from that of my friends. But, it had its downsides as well that I've talked about elsewhere. But I think what I did learn from that was a great interest in the sea. And still now, the sea is so important to me. Every time I actually live in the Greater London area, but every time I go down to the coast, the first time I see the sea, I just feel excited. It's a sort of visceral reaction. I don't even think about it. I just suddenly I can see the sea. Wow, the pulse quickens.
Oh, it's so lovely to have that connection, and I'm finding a lot of people's connection to specifically the subjects they're most interested in stem way back from childhood, and you can really see that in your story there. So yeah, it's lovely to hear that, and I'm realising now the importance, I think, of when we're younger, having that connection to nature. So how do you feel, I guess, when you're out doing photography? Because you clearly have a very deep connection and you're able to really immerse yourself in the landscape. So how does that make you feel?
It's huge. It's huge. I don't get to do it as often as I'd like these days because I'm too busy running a business. And just because it's a photography business doesn't mean it isn't massively time consuming and pulls me away from the coast. But when I do actually get to just go down to the coast with my camera on my own and spend a good chunk of time just making photos, even if I get no decent photos, which is quite common, because I'm really getting more and more fussy now. So, if the photo, if I'm not really proud of it, it never gets seen. So more often than not, I will not bring back a photo that anyone will ever see. But it doesn't seem to matter. It's the experience that's everything for me. And, if I get a great photo, that's a bonus. But I never regret one of those days, even if I'm down there and there's nothing happening, the conditions aren't inspiring me, or I'm just not in the zone. I just keep making photos. I make rubbish photos, and it doesn't matter. I just enjoy the experience. And being in the presence of the thing that I'm passionate about is never going to be a bad thing.
I guess, have you always had this connection with the experience? Because I think a lot of photographers are very almost results orientated, and I love that you speak there about the experience being everything. So has that always been your philosophy when you've been out with your camera, or has it been a gradual thing for you to kind of learn and step back from over the years?
That's an interesting question. You are asking different questions. It's great. Well done. Actually, think that I've only recently come to realise that it was probably always there. The reason I realised it was I remembered an incident that happened way back in 2015, I think. Doesn't matter. I went on a workshop as a client. One of the last times I went, in fact, the last time I went on a workshop as a client with Jonathan Critchley, who I now lead workshops for. And at one point, he said, it was a cast-off phrase that's just stuck in my mind. We'd rocked up at a beautiful place, and it was pouring with rain, and most people were elected to retreat to the 4x4 and the cover, and I didn't. I stood out there and I just kept going, and none of those photos are any good, by the way. There's raindrops on the lens. It's all complete rubbish. They're underexposed. They're embarrassing. But when I came back to the car, Jonathan just laughed and said, "You just like making photos, don't you? You just like being there making photos." And that's come back to me now. I've suddenly remembered that as you asked the question. So I would say, yes, it's having the luxury. It's a massive luxury to be in a place that's wonderful, making photos. It's just the most magical experience, and it's always absorbed me. It's always been enough, because you just completely forget about everything else in the world. And there's lots to forget about, isn't there, these days? So it's just wonderful. In that time, it's this little bubble out of everything else in the world. And it's my legal high, I think.
Oh, I love that. There's so much in that I can really relate to. You know, when I began photography, it was all about feeling for me and about that experience. I was going through a very tough time at the time. I was very depressed and anxious, and almost I didn't want to be alive, to be honest. And it was going down to the beach and just watching the sunsets and then picking up my camera. Like you said there about being in that bubble, it was like everything that was going on in my life for that hour or so that I was out, it was just, I could switch off from it all and connect with something so much bigger than me. And I find a lot of people have this kind of feeling. It's like when they're out there, it's very mindful. You're completely immersed in what's going on around you. But there are a lot of people who also get sucked into, like I say, that results and really pressurising themselves, I think, and having that expectation to create something. And it almost takes away the enjoyment. So I guess as you've moved into doing things more professionally, have you ever felt, I guess, that almost pressure? Or have you been very, I guess, true and authentic to yourself and been like, do you know what, I'm not feeling it today, this just isn't working, but still accepting it and being happy with it? How have you felt with that?
It's been okay, but I think that's because of the particular area in the industry I've chosen to work, which is the gallery market side of things, because it means that I hardly ever do a commission, so I'm not putting that pressure on myself to produce an image by a deadline of a particular sort, anything. I make the photos I want to make when I want to make them, if I'm lucky, and I just hope that somebody else will like them enough to maybe buy a print, or a gallery will exhibit them or whatever. And that really makes it easy for me to take the pressure off. If I'm not feeling it, okay, it doesn't matter. Just make some pictures, stand there. I usually find actually that when I first get to a beach, quite often the first few photos I make, or even the first far too many hundreds of photos I make, I'm thinking, Rachel, you've done this before. This is rubbish. Oh God, horizon on the top, not third because I hate those, but horizon above centre, swishy water in the foreground, mountain in the background. Oh, good grief, Rachel. How many of those have you done? Stop it. But I have to kind of do those, and then I'm getting the zone, and then I start to look for something different. And I'm quite happy to waste a whole shoot on a crazy experiment. Like I might see a little pattern in the sea and think, wow, I love the way the light's doing that with the foam against that bit of pattern. I wonder if I can get a photo out of that, and spend ages and ages taking loads and loads of photos. And then when I come home and look at them much later and look at them, I think, actually, they're all pants. It doesn't matter. I'm kind of cool with that. So I think not everyone works that way. I don't want to kind of come across as didactic and suggest that this is better than any other way of working. I know some photographers who are far more efficient, far more analytical, and that's how their brains work, and they make good work, so that's fine. But for me, that wouldn't be rewarding. I can remember going to Harris, for example, with a photographer once, and neither of us had been there before. And we were there for a week, and we rocked up at Rosamel Beach, first time either of us had been there, and it was raining. And I was like, wow, and I'm running down the beach, and I've got my camera and my tripod out, and it's pouring with rain, and I'm so excited. And this other photographer, totally efficient, just waited for the rain to stop, texted me, said, I've identified 2 photographs here. So she went on and she made the 2 photographs, and then she started texting me saying, I'm back at the car, and things like that. And I was by now right round the corner of Rosamel, heading towards Luscantire, and miles from the car, and she's bored to death waiting by the car for me, wanting to go back to the hotel for happy hour because she's got her 2 pictures. And I'm not sure I got any better pictures or any more pictures than her, but I had such a great time wandering about in this amazing space in all the horrible weather that Harris can throw at you. And I don't want to lose that ever. If someone said to me, you'll never make a good photo again, Rachel, I'd still go out and just be in those places.
That's so lovely to hear, and there's a lot there that I think people will find very inspiring. As you rightly said there, everybody's process is so different. Some people are quite technical and methodical and do a lot of planning and preparation. Other people go out there and just immerse themselves in it, take loads of images, delete nearly all of them, but they might come away with one or two that they like, but they had a great experience. And I love that you share there that you often take hundreds of images that you then end up having to delete. But I find that really inspiring, I think, especially with the coast, because you often do when you're photographing waves, don't you? You have to take a lot of images of them coming in and crashing at different moments in time to get that, image that really speaks to you or says something different. And of course, a lot of your most famous imagery is of, waves as they're just before they break, and there's almost like faces and everything in them. So I guess when it comes to your shoots when you go out, you of course, although you say that you take loads and loads of images and whatnot, you of course will have your favourite places. And do you have much planning that goes into the sort of beaches and locations that you choose, or is it more of a felt thing? You kind of go where you feel you want to go?
Well, for me, I know I really like going back to places. Like, my family laugh at me because if we ever go on holiday somewhere new, I'd spend the whole holiday, well, it's not the whole holiday, but I do spend a lot of time saying, next time we come, we'll go here and we'll go back to there and all of this. And they say, we might not come back. But I almost have to do that to enjoy being there, because I hate the thought that I'll never be back. And I find that it makes it easier for me as a photographer that I know places really well. So I have explored every inch of the British coast that's within a day's trip of where I live. It's where I grew up anyway, which helps. And I know every beach, I know every location, and I know what's going to suit which weather forecast, and even more so because I'm a coastal photographer, what's going to suit what tide. So if I do have a day set aside for photography, it doesn't matter what the weather forecast is. I can find a beach where I can do work and enjoy it, no matter what the forecast. It just might not be the same beach. So if the forecast is for sun and plain blue skies, well, I've got a project I'm working on that I want good side light, I need sunlight. And I need it golden hour sunlight. So a clear blue sky is fine because I'm actually pointing down at details on the beach, and I need sand. So if I've got the day in my diary set aside, and when the day rolls round, the forecast is for plain blue skies, I might, another photographer might, I don't know, say, well, actually, that's going to be a waste of time. I won't go. I'll do something else more valuable with that day. But I won't. I will still go, because I just will choose to go to a beach I know is going to have sand, and I'm going to work on that project. If the forecast shows that it's windy and there's going to be rain, well, I've got another place to go where I know that the wind in that direction will interact with that beach in a particular way that will enable me to work on a different project. So for me, getting to know places really, really well is super, super important, and it allows me, I think, to work in any conditions, which also really helps with leading workshops, of course.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely something to be said about knowing a location well, and nearly every image I've taken that I would consider to be my favourites have all been taken in my local area, and it's partly due to that, knowing it well, having that connection to it, but also just, I guess, feeling into it, and there's just this deep almost knowing when I go out with my camera that I almost know I'm going to be able to connect with something, whereas when I travel and go to other parts of the country, I don't have that same connection. And it's not just the feeling of knowing the place, it's also just, this is almost foreign to me, even though it's only a few hours away, and there's not that same connection for me. So I love that you have a lot of that connection locally, but you of course do go to other places as well. You mentioned there, going to Harris and things. So again, are you quite, I guess, picky about where you go, or are you quite open to exploring different parts of the coastline?
I like to explore, absolutely. But even with Harris, I then went back every year for 7 years at the same time of year and spent almost all of my time on those same beaches. And just, again, really love getting to know a place deeply. I like to think, maybe it's fanciful, but I like to think that there's an authenticity that you can achieve with your work if you've spent enough time in that place that you have an understanding of it. I don't know if that's true. Maybe I'm just trying to cheer myself up with the thought that that's the case. But for example, I mentor a lot of people, and I was mentoring a client last week who was trying to choose between two projects: a project based on a location that he knows really well and go to regularly, and another project based on work that he has got from a workshop he did in a different country. And he undoubtedly has amazing photos from that country. But there's an authenticity, coming back to that word, there's an authenticity to the work that he's producing in his local area. A place that he is, not only that he knows well, but that to which he actually belongs. And that sense of belonging in a place is something I don't think you can achieve with 1, 2, even 3 visits. You've got to spend a lot of time somewhere before you can feel that. And I think we can't always say where we see it within a photo, but I think we can often feel, if we're at all sensitive, we can feel the authenticity that comes from a photographer working in places that he or she is absolutely embedded.
Definitely. And I've realised that in my work. I've kind of been through this cycle since I began, 14 years ago now. I've tried so many different locations, different places, and when I go to places that I just don't feel a connection to, but I think, well, this is an iconic spot and a lot of people say it's good for photography, I just notice it doesn't reflect my work. But when I'm in that place that really speaks to me, like you mentioned there, that place of belonging, that place that I really feel connected to, I just feel like my images just seem to be so much better, more resonant with me, and they relate to so many more people. And I feel like I've got to a stage now in my work where I kind of know who I am, what I actually enjoy photographing, and I'm making such a conscious effort now to ensure that every time I go out, I'm going to where I feel drawn to go that day, where I feel a connection to it. And that's what I love about you, is that authenticity relating to the coast and just how much you love it. And do you ever feel tempted to go off and photograph other locations, or are you kind of, you're very much like the coast is my home? Do you experiment with other places?
That's a very timely question, because I'm very good friends with a woodland photographer called Simon Baxter.
Yes, I interviewed him last week,
actually.
Did you? So he's going to be in a few weeks, yes.
Excellent. Well, he and I, we are good mates, and we message each other quite a lot on WhatsApp, and we were this morning. And we both worked in Antarctica earlier this year. We went to Antarctica as co-leaders on a workshop organised by someone else. And we were both on WhatsApp. We've been messaging each other because we've both got photographs of mountains that we like, but we don't have any place for them in our work, because he's a woodland photographer and I'm a seascape photographer. And I don't know if you can see behind you, I guess this isn't very useful for a podcast, but there's a black and white mountain just back behind me at the minute. I made some nice pictures there of black and white mountains that I'm pleased with. I haven't published them because I have no idea what to do with them, because there are a lot of great mountain photographers out there, and a lot of them work in black and white, and maybe these pictures look a bit like theirs. So I don't know. I haven't decided what to do with them, or whether just to keep them for me. I'm starting to make handmade books just for me, and I'm wondering maybe the solution is just to make a handmade book of those pictures, and just might enjoy doing that and just keep it somewhere just for me. So yes, the short answer is yes, I do photograph away from the coast, but that's more hobby, whereas the coastal stuff is also professional, if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%. I think it can get quite difficult, can't it, when we almost, I don't want to say box ourselves into a genre, because, like I say, it's clear you love the coast, but in the future you might get to a stage where you might suddenly have more interest in something like mountains, and it can be hard to kind of come out of that, can't it? But as you rightly say there, it's nice to have that almost differentiation between the professional side of your work and the personal side of your work. And you'd mentioned earlier that now you spend a lot of time running your business and things, you don't get out with your camera maybe as much as you'd maybe like to, or as you used to. So how do you find juggling that? Because I think it's quite important as a creative person, isn't it, to ensure that you do still make time for that. So yeah, do you manage to make time for it regularly, or is it quite a challenge?
It's a big challenge. I wish I could come across here as super confident and I've got it all fixed, but I haven't. It's a really big challenge, not least because I very rarely carry a camera when I'm teaching. So it's not like I can be making photos when I'm leading workshops. I'm not very good at that sort of multitasking. I'm not for a minute suggesting that others don't do it very well. I'm sure they do, but I know what I'm like when I'm making photos. I am very immersed in it. It's part of why I do it. That's what we've talked about that already. It's the experience of making photos and being in that bubble. Well, how am I going then to help clients if I'm in my bubble? I'm not. So I find I can't do both. So I have a very, very well established, very busy, very successful workshops business. And that stops me from doing my own work. So I need to find a better balance. I have to. It's one of the things I'm working on at the moment, because I know I've actually got the balance wrong at the minute. This year is a very fallow year for me for new work because I haven't got time for it. And so I need to improve that. And I suspect that's a balancing act that will continue until I retire, whenever that is.
I think a lot of people struggle with that, don't they? They really struggle with it because it's like you don't want to say no to work and you want to, keep, clients and work coming in. But equally, it's like you say, it's about getting that balance. If we don't have that balance, it can be quite difficult, I guess, from a well-being perspective as well as a creative perspective, just to, maintain that balance in life. But you mentioned there about retiring, but I think it's quite hard when you're a creative, isn't it? Because you're always going to want to do photography your whole life.
Yeah. Well, I'm in my 50s, and 50s are the new 40s, right? So I'm not going to retire. Not anytime soon, anyway.
Yeah, and I guess with some of what you do as well, like, even like with the gallery work and stuff, I know it takes a lot out of you to prepare, for gallery work and things. But I guess, as we get older, if you're able to stay in that sort of genre, once your gallery's up and running, at least you're not out there doing loads of physical stuff. There's ways, I guess, that, with retirement age getting bigger and bigger and bigger, that as creatives we can find work that's not as maybe physically or time consuming as maybe other professions, for instance.
Well, that's a good thought.
I like to be the optimist.
Well, I hope my aged body will let me keep going to the coast and making photos for a while yet.
Yes, and the thing is, I guess when we're active as well, it's easier as we get older to remain active. The more we're out there doing things, just the easier it usually is for people. So it's not only, I think, as being kind of nature outdoor photographers, really beneficial from a creative standpoint, but the well-being benefits for everything I'm finding is just amazing. It's nice to be able to do that. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess you kind of see photography as a very kind of creative, almost art form, don't you, rather than the more technicality side of photography. So when you're out there creating your images, what is your process? When you arrive on location, do you take time to immerse yourself first? I know you say you take like hundreds of images before you start taking the ones you like, but do you take that time to just stand there and immerse yourself and look at what's going on and then do your images? Or how is your process?
It varies actually with my mood, frankly. Sometimes I'm bounding with energy and I might just go charging about all over the place. And maybe just looking and working out what I'd like to do, or maybe actually if it's if I already know, just get going. But equally there are days when I have done days where I just go to one spot and I see the whole tidal cycle through. So I guess that's 6 hours, right? Difference between low tide and high tide, and I'll just hang out, have a packet of sandwiches with me, and a water bottle, and just hang out, and might make no photos at all. So it does vary, which is a pretty rubbish answer, I guess, but that's the truth. And But the one thing I do always do, though, even if it's a day where I'm full of energy and I'm making loads of photos, I do always stop at some point and just watch. For example, even on a day when there's a big storm, days where I've photographed sirens, my waves with the faces you mentioned, there have been moments in that where I've just stopped, and I'm usually lying on the beach. I just put the camera down and I just stare, and it's incredible, you know, because particularly that's long lens work. I love the way the long lens sucks you into the scene, and I like long lens work better than any other, actually. But you do also risk missing some of what's going on because you are seeing just a tiny part of the scene. So I love that sort of shock, surprise. You know, you've been doing long lens, and then you put it down, and your eyes almost kind of pan out, and you just stop, and then paying attention not just to what I'm seeing, but engaging all the other senses in an almost deliberate way. You know, right, what does this sound like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? You know, I'm usually covered in spray, you know, so I'm getting sort of a facial without paying for it. You know, all of those things. And it's sort of, well, trendy word now, mindfulness, but it is a form of mindfulness. I've done CBT, so it strictly is mindfulness. It's that very conscious engaging with everything that your senses are bringing you from an experience. And some of those moments are as powerful for me in my memory as moments where I got pictures I love. So I think a healthy balance of the two. Now I was talking to a friend earlier today telling her this story, so I'll make it really brief. Here's an example of the very opposite of what I like to be like. Now, I was leading a workshop in Iceland, which is my specialist country for ocean capture. And I'd taken my little group to a little waterfall. So it's very quiet there because everyone's photographing the famous big waterfalls, right? This little waterfall is really beautiful and well worth our time. So I was there with my little group, and we'd been there an hour, and they were fully immersed and really engaging with this beautiful place, and no one else was there. And then because I'm not making photos and no one needed me in that moment, I'm sort of standing back. You can see the whole scene. I saw this car pull up, and it's sort of, you know, very efficient kind of car, you know, pulled up, stopped, and out leapt this man, and he got his camera bag out and his tripod, and then he marched. It's about 100 yards to the waterfall past me. He marched in this really business-like way. His face was kind of set and determined. And he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was super efficient, like my friend in Harris. Put his tripod down, put the camera on the tripod, did his long exposure, put it all away in the bag, put it on his back, marched back to the car, leapt in and drove off, presumably to the next location. Meanwhile, my clients are still pottering around, just really enjoying this beautiful place. And in that moment, I felt profoundly sorry for that man. Because, all right, he may have got the best photo of the day of that waterfall. He probably did. He clearly knew what he was doing. He was super efficient, etc. Maybe he went on and made loads more really great photos. And maybe he had a commission and he needed to do it and all of that. But he had absolutely missed out in the biggest way possible. He hadn't in any way experienced the atmosphere of that lovely little place. Everyone in my group, no matter what the photos they made, everyone in my group absolutely experienced that beautiful place that morning. And their lives have been enriched by that. And his has not. And if there is one thing I could wish for photographers generally, nature photographers, is that they could stop looking on nature as a resource to exploit for their photographs and start connecting with it. And enjoying it and appreciating it and feeling it. And I just wish we could have that all nature photographers could be like that.
Oh, that warms my heart, Rachel. I love that you've just shared that, because That is really my vision as well. It's this connection to nature that just, like you say, he could not experience that. And it's beautiful because I'm finding so many more people are opening up about this now and becoming more consciously aware of the importance of actually spending time in a location. You'd mentioned there using your senses to really connect to it. If you use your senses, you listen to what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you're tasting, what you're feeling, you can then bring that into an image. My texture, if I'm photographing textures, it doesn't just come from a visual place, it comes often from what I can feel through them as well. And when you're photographing the sea, as you'll experience, it's often about the sound as well, the sound of the waves. You're trying to bring that into your imagery, and as you rightly say, if you just march out your car, take one image and leave again, you're missing that, and you're missing all the other opportunities. And yeah, that experience is such a beautiful thing. And yeah, I'm just so grateful that you shared that story there, because I think there's a lot of people listening to this podcast specifically that will really resonate with that.
Excellent. Well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, it's brilliant. No, it really is, because I think it really is part of the process. And I just love it that you've said that. It's really, really great. And yeah, I love that your workshops as well allow your clients to take that step back and spend that time in locations, because there's obviously, as we've mentioned, every different type of photographer out there, some very methodical ones, some very creative ones, and it's good to connect, I think, with another photographer who does that more creative stuff, rather than going to like these bucket list locations and just getting your photograph and leaving again. And how do you feel? I think the last question here is, how do you feel when you're working with clients, like being able to facilitate that experience for them? You want them to have a good time, you want them to enjoy the location, you want them to, I guess, almost feel the things that you feel when you're out there, but of course create their own visual representation of it. How do you facilitate that to ensure that they experience that connection and get that enjoyment out of it, as well as come home with the images that they're maybe hoping to create?
Well, I tell them that they're going to do it.
Brilliant.
So I at the start of the workshop, if they don't already know me, most of my clients have been with me for a long time. They're a very loyal bunch. But if they're new clients, I think I make it pretty clear in the most obvious way I can by literally saying, we're here to experience these places, not just to extract photographs from them. And I do occasionally I obviously do get new clients. I look forward to new clients because they may become lovely clients who I see and a lot in the future. But I do sometimes get clients. I had one last year who had been bought the day workshop by his son as a present, and he came, and clearly all he wanted was the locations. So, he wanted me to show him locations where he could make photos. And he just would have, if he could have controlled the day, we would have spent the day charging about and crammed in as many locations as possible. I won't see him again, and that's okay with me. The other 3 clients wanted to immerse themselves in these beautiful coast, and were very happy with 2 locations in a day. And I will see them again, and that's okay. I'm very lucky in that my workshops always sell out super fast, and I don't. It's been the business has been. That's not me boasting. The business has been going for a long time, and you eventually you accumulate enough clients that happens, and those clients are coming back again and again because they agree with me and this approach, and so it's okay. I don't worry that someone's going to dislike me because they think this is all airy-fairy and silly. That's okay. There are plenty of photographers out there providing the right content for them, and they shouldn't waste their money on me. They should go to those other workshops. If the clients would like to make great photos, but more importantly have an amazing experience in nature, then they can come to me and I will deliver.
It comes back to that word authenticity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Being authentic to yourself, running your workshops as you feel is, the correct way to do it, and you will attract most of the time the right clients to do that. So,
and if you don't, well, they vote with their feet, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
And people can sense it, can't they, when you're trying to be or produce or create or give a service that's not authentic to you. Most people can feel that, and as you say, they will just walk away because they're like, this just doesn't feel right. So yeah.
Absolutely right.
Brilliant, Rachel. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And for anybody listening that isn't aware of you and your work or would like to connect with you further, where can they go to find you?
Well, my name is ever so easy because there's no one else on the planet with it, apparently. So,
amazing.
Yeah. Rachael has 2 A's, and then Talibart is just as it sounds, Talibart. So if they just put in that, they'll find me. And my workshops business, if I'm allowed to mention that, am I allowed to mention that? Of
course, yes.
Okay, thank you. Is F11, the Aperture, F11 Workshops.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I believe we will be meeting in person in the Scottish Highlands in October at the Creative Light Festival. So I really look forward to that.
Oh, me too. I can't wait. It'll be lovely actually to have met you beforehand in this way and then to actually meet you in person. It'll be fantastic.
Yes. And last year's festival was great. So I'm really looking forward to this year's as well. So yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Kim.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Now that this podcast has come to an end, there's only one thing left for you to do. It's time to pick up your camera and head outdoors. There's so many incredible photographic opportunities just waiting for you to discover.